Hello and welcome to Colonial Outcast, the anti-imperialist podcast that your problematic uncle will hate, because we are going to be discussing why it's dangerous for the state to be able to disappear people for their anti-war political beliefs, and he loves that the state can do that. This episode is about the disappearing and potential deportation of Mahmoud Khalil, Palestinian activist, detained by ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement for our overseas listeners, over Columbia University protests. President Trump has likened him to a, quote, terrorist sympathizer, unquote, for saying such direct things as a Palestinian student, I believe that the liberation of the Palestinian people and the Jewish people are intertwined and go hand in hand, and you cannot achieve one without the other, he told CNN last spring. This sets a pretty dangerous and overtly fascist precedent for the Trump 2.0 administration. We're going to be talking to Nerdeen Kiswani, Palestinian-American activist and organizer. She's the co-founder and chair of Within Our Lifetime, a pro-Palestinian activist group in New York City, and Marie Adele, a third-year student at Barnard, Columbia, an activist for Palestine who knows Mahmoud personally. We're also going to be doing a Know Your Rights call to action here at the end of this, because we're trying to, because they're trying to make the First Amendment fungible. I'm your host, Greg Stoker, former U.S. Army Ranger turned anti-war activist and geopolitical analyst, and to the three-letter agency case officer watching this, hi, I know what you got on me. I had a top secret security clearance back in the day when I was part of Joint Special Operations Command, so you've got my biometrics, fingerprints, DNA, you know who my high school guidance counselor was, and you know every country I've ever been to, and you know that I didn't have a girlfriend in high school, so very shy and awkward back in the day. But saddle up, you might learn something from this episode, but I doubt it, since you make over six figures a year with benefits in order to perpetuate state violence and the repression of Americans. That's why they pay you so much. So keep doing what you do. Anyways, this episode is done in conjunction with Mint Press News. They're going to be cutting video segments from this episode and reposting them to their platform, because this is the most important domestic and international story from a policy perspective going on right now, because governments learn from each other. They watch each other to see what they can get away with. So if they're able to disappear people in America, which is really strong constitutional protections, it will embolden other governments in Europe, UK, Australia. Yeah, so coming to a local police department near you. I told y'all you were going to love 25. So let's get started, y'all. Pulling everybody up. So again, we are joined by Nerdeen Kiswani, founder of Within Our Lifetime, and Marie Adele, student activist at Columbia University. Thanks so much for taking the time to come on, y'all.
Thank you.
Of course, thanks for having us.
So just to contextualize a timeline for the audience, I just got like 2 minutes of exposition, and I know most of you guys listen to the audio, so we're just going to be doing that. So a government lawyer, this is from today, asked a federal judge in Manhattan on Wednesday, March 12th, to move the legal fight over the detention of Columbia University graduate student Mahmoud Khalil to New Jersey or Louisiana, two locations where he has been held as the Trump administration seeks to deport him over his participation in pro-Palestinian protests at the school. The immigration enforcement agents arrested Khalil, a permanent U.S. resident who is married to an American citizen, in New York on Saturday. After initially being held in New Jersey, he was moved to an immigration detention center in Louisiana. One reason for this, I've talked to a couple legal experts about this, is one of the reasons, is because they thought a Louisiana judge would be more hardline about deportation than a New York judge. And they were right, because after Khalil's arrest, Judge Jesse M. Furman ordered that the 30-year-old not be deported while the court considers a legal challenge brought by his lawyers, who are seeking to have Khalil returned to New York and released under supervision. They argue that he engaged in protected free speech and that the government is illegally retaliating against him over it. So personally, it's really alarming how many Americans falsely think that the U.S. Constitution only applies to U.S. citizens. It's a restriction on the U.S. government actions, and it applies to all people legally on U.S. soil. Otherwise, the U.S. government could mass arrest all tourists who it concludes has bad views. The Supreme Court has upheld that non-citizens are protected by the U.S. Constitution, including undocumented immigrants. The Constitution requires states to treat non-citizens similarly to citizens, with some exceptions. So the Trump administration has based the arrest on a provision of immigration law that gives it broad authority over who can be subject to deportation. So using those immigration law provisions to deport a green card holder is actually rare. They are typically used by ICE, or if ICE alleges a person was, quote, providing direct financial or operational support to a terror organization. So it's far less common for ICE to allege that political views or speech renders a green card holder deportable under terrorism grounds, as that raises significant First Amendment concerns. And, here we are. So anyways, Judge Furman, and I'm almost done, called the legal issues important and weighty and asked two sides to submit a joint letter on this Friday, describing when they propose to submit written arguments over legal issues raised by Khalil's detention. So this is going to be an ongoing legal battle. This is not going to get resolved in the immediate future. Ramzi Qassem, representing Khalil's interests, said the student lawyers have been unable to have even a single attorney-client privilege conversation with Khalil since he was taken into custody. And Qassem, his lawyer, told the judge that Khalil was identified, targeted, and detained because of his advocacy for Palestinian rights and his protected speech. He said Khalil has no criminal convictions, and in fact, he has not been charged with anything, but for some reason is being detained. So there's a lot of concerns about what precedent this is going to be is being set for the First Amendment, for political dissent here in America under Trump. It kind of seems like a systems test where there's not a lot of legal basis for what's going on, but they're trying to see and ram through what they can get away with. And Nerdeen, as someone who's been in this for a long time and, experienced Trump 1.0 and the Muslim ban, which was pretty egregious and ended up getting stopped in the courts, does this kind of feel similar or different to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Palestinians have always been the test case for the U.S. government to figure out, what kind of laws or what kind of arguments they can craft to sort of suppress the movement for Palestinian liberation. And I actually worked under Ramzi Qassem of CLEAR. I was part of the Creating Law Enforcement Accountability and Responsibility Clinic at CUNY Law, which I graduated from in 2022. And he is the founder of that clinic. And, not to speak for them, but just as an activist and as someone who's witnessed these things, like you said, and studied them, dating back to even the 80s, it's obvious that they're just using Mahmoud to see that if their interpretation of the law holds in court, they'll go all the way to the Supreme Court to do that. And if, it does hold up in court, they'll use that as precedent. So it's clear that that's what they're trying to do. And, even though this is something that seems Trumpian, you can guarantee that Democratic presidents will use it too if it works. And, like you said at the beginning of this, if it's established that this is perfectly acceptable to do in the United States, you can bet that it's going to happen all over the world. We know historically national security prosecutions ramp up and blossom under Democratic presidents. The Democratic Party really set the dominoes in order for this to happen with their constant vilification and demonization of Palestinian protesters, accusations of supporting terrorism, accusations of anti-Semitism that really fomented the environment for which this can occur in. And, we've seen it under even Obama, who being the one who prosecuted the most people for so-called terrorist crimes, and Bill Clinton, passing a law about foreign terrorist organizations. And, I can go into these cases a little bit more later on, just to not take up too much time now. But we've seen these unprecedented things happening to Palestinians before, whether it was the Holy Land Five, the 5 Palestinian-American humanitarians who started the largest Muslim charity in the United States, where it was the first time they used secret evidence in a courtroom to actually get their conviction because they couldn't really prove that they were providing any material support to Hamas. The charities that they were funding and supporting were the same charities that the U.S. government was also giving money to Rasmia Auda, who's a Palestinian woman and a torture survivor and activist in Chicago, who was denaturalized. She had a citizenship, and it was stripped of her, and she was deported. And this was something that I was, active in organizing against as part of Students for Justice in Palestine. Many chapters around the country, were fighting this to the LA8 when in 1907, 7 Palestinian immigrants and 1 Kenyan were arrested for distributing magazines and organizing for Palestinian rights. The magazines they were distributing were for the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, also designated a foreign terrorist organization by the US, and they tried to say that this was material support. And the case fell apart in court, but still the US government spent over 20 years just tormenting them and trying to deport them. So, we see that Palestinians are often the canary in the coal mine. They are the test case for the fascism that the US continuously expands and grows. And that's exactly what's happening here with Mahmoud's case.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of misinformation. The propaganda push around this case reminds me of like 2002, global war on terror just kicking off, ramping up to the Iraq war. It's pretty insane. So before I get to you, Marie Adele, I just wanted to play Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who's received a lot of AIPAC money over his career and is a self-professed Christian evangelical Zionist, straight up lying about the campus protests at Columbia University. Here we go.
Yeah. In your estimation, what crime did Mahmoud Khalil commit to warrant his arrest, detention, and the potential revocation of his green card?
Let me tell you something. I went face down the angry mob at Columbia at the height of that stuff. When the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protesters were there. I'm telling you, this is my own observation, not something I read in a newspaper. It was dangerous. I met with Jewish students before we went to campus who were holed away off campus because they were instructed by the administration not to come to class.
Yeah, personally, I'm in touch with some organizers for Jewish Voice for Peace on Columbia campuses. So, yeah, there was also Jewish people in the pro-Hamas crowd, apparently. Just slight fact check on that one.
Which they paid for fear of their physical safety. The administrators there refused to take control of that campus. They refused to allow the PD to come, the police department to come in and take control. And it turned into a chaos. The president has since been removed. And now they got the same problem again. Columbia and other universities, they have to keep control of campus. The first responsibility of an administration is ensuring the safety of the students who are paying tuition to be there, for crying out loud. This madness has to stop. We have to get control of it. This guy apparently was a mastermind of those very things, when the gnashing of teeth and the ripping of clothes and the people screaming at me, wanting to rip me limb from limb because I was there talking about moral clarity and how there's a right and a wrong. They were doing that. They disrupted the campus. They were threatening physical.
Okay, so comrade and friend of the show, the rapper Immortal Technique, just wanted y'all to know that, quote, I lived 10 blocks away. There was no danger. He didn't face down anyone. This plump coward was behind a wall of cops and stayed in his armored vehicle. Whoever believes this or applauds this on other pages is delusional or just easily impressed. So that coming from Immortal Technique. Anyways, you, Marie Adele, are on campus. I've been beefing on getting into like petty Twitter fights with propagandists saying, Eyal Yacobi, breaking. Terrorist supporters, and I'll just play this real quick. Terrorist supporting students and faculty are currently blocking the steps to enter the classroom at Columbia. These extremists in Columbia continue to prove that they prioritize support for terrorism over an education. And, I basically said they literally did the same thing to protest the Vietnam War, South African apartheid, and fossil fuels. And every time the ruling class and their propagandists spewed the same BS and mobilized the cops to brutalize them. In 10 years, this will be celebrated on campus tours, just like all those other protests. And also just as a former alum of Columbia University, wait, are there any classrooms in this building? Because that's on the other side of the courtyard from Butler Library, right?
No, there are no classes in that building.
Yeah. And, if there's no libraries, or either you can go to Butler or you can go to Avery. So anyway, just wanted to put that out there. So what is the atmosphere on campus now that Mahmoud has been detained?
I would say, for starters, I'm so proud of my Jewish peers who are able to pull that together. The general climate is, I would say the general climate is one of a lot of fear of repression. You'll notice that protest is pretty much only Jewish students, and that is because no one else is safe to protest on campus right now. And we are still attempting to find ways to effectively exercise freedom of speech without putting our peers who are immigrants at risk. And so the fact that we are having to ensure that the people who are speaking and the words they are saying are so tightly controlled is already something we should be extremely concerned about. And I also do want to add that the only thing I'll agree with the speaker on before is that it is our campus's job to keep us safe. And they have repeatedly shown that they do not care about their Palestinian students or their pro-Palestine students. Last week, Naftali Bennett, former Prime Minister of Israel, spoke at our school. And our school also last week, Barnard College called Strategic Response Group onto campus after faking a bomb threat. So they are explicitly not keeping us safe. And then this initial use of ICE is showing that they will continue to be complicit.
And just for the audience, what is the Strategic Response Unit?
The Strategic Response Unit is New York's version of SWAT.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. So, okay, do you feel like the administration itself is more hostile towards you this year than it was last year?
I don't know if I would say that it's more hostile, but I will say that they have felt vindicated in being hostile. So they have ramped up how intense they are based on what they've gotten away with. Just like you and Nerdeen were talking about with governments seeing what has been done in the past and then continuing it into the present, they have felt they have more of a leash to do really awful things. And also with the way Zionists are behaving and the way Zionists, especially with this administration, but in the government in general, have been extremely willing and able to pressure the president, for example, into doing things just by tweeting at them. That means the campus will continue to act towards their will and towards the will of powerful donors over the safety of Palestinian students. So I would say that the same admin is still awful, but they're ramping up.
Yeah, and I don't know, Nerdeen, have you heard that they're trying to the government is trying to get the names from the administration of other student activists?
Yeah, I think they actually gave Columbia admin names of people that they want to go after, and groups like Batar, which I think all Zionist organizations are extremist organizations, but they're especially wild. They actually, Batar is a group that's like based here in New York City and the U.S. It was revived recently, but it was actually founded by Zev Jabotinsky. They're claiming that they're working with the U.S. government to give the names of Columbia students and other students that are foreign nationals that they believe should be deported. And this is the same organization that also offered people on Twitter $1,800 to give me a beeper, basically like a bomb threat. So it's just wild.
Wait, they actually served you with a beeper?
No, every time they did try to get near me, but like a mob of people just like crowds around me and prevents them from.
Oh yeah, I saw Norm Finkelstein got one.
Yeah.
So.
They also threatened Peter Barnard. They don't even like Shai Davidai. They think Shai Davidai is too lukewarm for them. So
because he still says I still believe in human rights and free speech, and and just for the audience, Batar, or the Batar movement, or Beitar, is a revisionist Zionist youth movement founded in 1923 in Latvia, and it was one of several right-wing youth movements that arose at that time and adopted special salutes and uniforms influenced by fascism. So that's the right-wing youth movement and the group that sprang out of that. That's what Nerdeen is talking about.
And they're 501c3 certified in New York right now.
Oh, they're a nonprofit. Excellent.
Yeah, they're a nonprofit. Our tax dollars subsidize them. And they've actually tweeted recently a picture of all of the names of babies under the age of 1 that were killed in Gaza. And they were like, this is not enough. We need more blood. So the fact that they're openly allowed to say this, they're tax deductible, we subsidize them. Letitia James, Attorney General, of New York is ignoring calls for them to be stripped of their nonprofit status. That is who the US government is colluding with right now to go after student activists in Colombia and possibly all over the country. I mean, Trump said this is just the first of many to come.
Well, yes, definitely alarming, but we also have to take whatever Trump says with a salt shaker. Again, I still think this is a systems test to see what they get away with. If they aren't able to deport him, I don't think they'll try again, and they'll just wait for the news cycle to turn over a couple more times and focus on something else.
But whether or not that's happening, I mean, there are precedents that are being broken elsewhere in Colombia. I mean, we were just talking about the Milstein Library occupation that happened a week or two ago. My timeline's, getting all messed up, but within our lifetime actually called for supporters along with like other student groups to go outside of Colombia and support the people who were doing the occupation when the whole bomb threat thing happened. And the reason that they were occupying it to begin with is because 3 students were expelled from Colombia for the first time since the 1930s. So the fact that, that hasn't happened in almost 100 years, and it's happening now to pro-Palestinian students, is really showing that precedents are being broken regardless of, Mahmoud's case even coming forward.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I pulled up from the New York Times archive. Columbia hears plea for expelled student. Burke and 2 other speakers demand his reinstatement at gathering of 500, September 25th, 1936. 3 members of the American Student Union, including Robert Burke, who was expelled in June for leading the anti-Nazi demonstration last May, addressed a gathering of 500 students of the college and the various schools of Columbia University in front of Hamilton Hall yesterday noon, appealing to them to support the youth in his fight for reinstatement. The more things, he was literally expelled from Columbia for protesting Nazis. So, Marie Adele, I think you were at least associated with the occupation in Barnard of that building, or at least
I wasn't present, but yes.
Yeah. So, what was the pretext for them exactly expelling these students? Again, because this is going to the other administrations and other universities are going to look at what the Columbia administration is doing, and they're going to learn from that, just like other governments are learning from what we're doing.
What I want to just really quickly note as well is that Barnard has broken every precedent they have. They have not historically expelled students, and this is the first time they've had any police on campus to arrest a protester in their entire history. So the Barnard administration has completely broken precedent. These students, all 3 of these students are expelled for protest actions, and they're not all the same protest action, but all 3 of them are expelled for protest actions. It's an absolutely unacceptable thing to expel these students, but especially at Barnard College, there is no due process or transparency in our disciplinary hearings. We cannot have a lawyer present, and we don't get our evidence ahead of time. We are kicked out of our housing, off our meal plans, and off our insurance immediately as soon as we get charged. We can't enter campus. And then the entire process is a decision made by one person, 1 or 2 people, and you don't have an appeal process unless you get significant new evidence, in quotes. So the entire Barnard disciplinary process is completely unjust and arbitrary. And so the precedent it's also setting is that we don't need to be consistent or showing any type of evidence in how we're repressing free speech. We can just do it and say it's valid, we're a private institution. And that's really concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in case the audience is confused, we're talking about Columbia, but Barnard was the women's college associated with Columbia, and now they're fully integrated. Like when I went to Columbia, I did. Oh, well,
it's still the women's college, but you can take classes at both.
Yeah, because I took 2 medieval history classes at Barnard, I remember.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. Well, different administrations though that are.
Yes.
Okay.
It's complicated, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in case you guys were confused about why we're using different university names. So, Nerdeen, you've been associated with Columbia. You're an activist in New York City. Where do you see this all going? I guess that's kind of a broad, open-ended question, but it's kind of overwhelming in some ways.
I mean, I think, this just exposes Columbia University to be basically a glorified landlord and gentrifier, like many universities that are being increasingly privatized, increasingly bending over backwards, throwing their own students and professors and community under the bus to appease administrations that cannot be appeased. And they refuse to learn this lesson. Over $400 million in federal grant funding towards Columbia was stripped because they didn't do enough to support, Jewish students on campus, when in fact, they have been releasing police on them. They have been punishing them. They have been doing everything to attack freedom of speech and free thought, which, they pretend to be proponents of to begin with. Mike Johnson, in that clip, he said that, they didn't allow the PD on campus. They brought the NYPD the second day of the encampment to come and arrest people. So, they're actually giving credence to all of this misinformation that's being put out about them, and it's working against them ultimately. And it ties back to the fact that, Israel systematically destroyed every single university in Gaza. No exaggeration. Every single university has been turned to rubble. There is no higher education there. And Columbia continues to invest in and collaborate with the forces that enable this destruction. So, this is making it very clear to students all over the country, and it's going to backfire on them. For all their claims to academic freedom, university administrations have chosen death over truth. And this is having the Streisand effect everywhere. The more they try to hide it, the more they try to silence and punish it, the more exposed it's going to be, and the more that people are going to fight back against it long term. I think this actually reignited the Palestine movement on campuses and in New York and all over the country specifically. So, I think the more they try to attack us, the more they try to silence us, the louder we will be. And any action that they have to shut down Palestinian activism, yes, people will sacrifice for it. A lot of people do get hurt by it, but overall, it really just makes the movement bigger and stronger than ever.
Yeah, it's even fracturing people on the right. Like Ann Coulter, even tweeted like, "Hey, should we be doing this?" Essentially, I'm trying to pull up exactly what she said, but I don't know. She posts all the time, and I can't find it. But yeah, this is a highly controversial move, even amongst people who associate themselves within MAGA or within the anti-authoritarian right. Like, I follow a lot of constitutionalists and stuff, and they're freaking out about this as well. So this is a very divisive and polarizing issue. And I just wanted to point out something. This is kind of more of like a factoid. It's not like a huge story, but according to the case filing, one of the arresting officers for Mahmoud Khalil was at the State of the Union.
Yep.
He was
honored in 2019
by one of those law enforcement heroes, ICE Special Agent Elvin Hernandez. When Elvin
This is like the montage in like an Ocean's 11-esque movie where it's just like building the squad of extra legal loyalist goons that will, do some potentially like gray, murky area work for the administration. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out, that guy at the State of the Union was one of the arresting officers.
And that totally makes sense, given that the reason they were, sent to even arrest Khalil to begin with was that, his student visa was revoked, which they didn't even know. He wasn't here on a student visa anymore. He was a legal permanent resident. That was revealed to them in the moment. And when they, were asked for a warrant that's supposed to say that, they just hung up on his lawyer. And I believe that, unless anything changed since in the last few hours that I checked, she still hasn't been able to actually speak to her client.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is kind of insane. What, as a student of the law, what legal precedent are they? Have you ever seen this before or heard of this before?
No, I haven't seen it before. And I really don't know how they can prove, any support for terrorism. I mean, usually when they talk about charging with people support for terrorism, it's material support for terrorism. So it's not just saying like, I support Palestinian resistance or Palestinians have the right to defend themselves, or even saying like, I support Hamas, right? Which I don't think he even, he's never done anything like that. But regardless, like that falls under the purview of freedom of speech. Material support, actually requires financial or some sort of like, different things that they can do to prove that. So the fact that
Another precedent was like putting plans in place to go leave America or Canada and join the Islamic State, back in 2015, 2016. That's also falls under that. But that's a pretty extreme thing to do.
Exactly. And, it's not really applied to other communities and other cases. Like, people in America were able to say they support the IRA and actually fundraise for the IRA, which was considered a terrorist organization by the US. And nothing, came of that. The Jewish Defense League was considered a terrorist organization up until a few years ago. And even while they were considered a terrorist org by the US, for the last 10 years, almost every protest within our lifetime has had, they've actually come and counter protested us, and they self-identify as members of JDL, which is considered an FTO, and they're allowed to openly operate and associate themselves as members of that org here without any repercussions. So it's absolutely ridiculous. But, when it comes to Palestine, we know it's never a fair game. It's always a double standard.
Well, and just adding on to that, with Mahmoud, they are setting such an extreme precedent because this would be unacceptable for absolutely any activist. And Mahmoud is the one that's negotiating with admin for us, calming us down, trying to tone everything back a little bit and make sure we're logical. And he's just the most, he's doing quote unquote everything right as for what the university and what the government tell him to do. They say protest, but do these things right. And Mahmoud did that. And so it's showing that even what they're considering to be quote good protesters are still at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now that he has been detained, I'm trying to pull up this audio quote I heard from a Palestinian activist calling campus security and be like, "What do we do if ICE shows up in our dorm room?" And they could not give an answer. Could you talk about is that a real concern for students now?
Well, for starters, Mahmoud wrote to campus the night before and at the beginning of the semester saying, "I'm scared that ICE will come," because he had been getting threats from Zionists on Twitter who had been speaking with the president and tweeting at congressional members and threatening this. And so he communicated that to the college and they never responded. Our university, until 2 days ago, had not sent out a single email on what to do if ICE comes. Our security has expressed that they have no training on how to handle ICE and can't actually stop ICE from coming onto campus. And the extent to the emails we've gotten from administration are a line at the bottom of an email of, "Oh, also if ICE comes, that we will require them to have a warrant before coming onto our property." And additionally, they have shown that they don't actually require warrants to come in and arrest people. They've arrested one of our peers. They escorted him to one of our peers' apartments that was Columbia housing, and arrested and allowed them to arrest him without a warrant. So I think Columbia has zero capacity to keep us safe and absolutely is not trying. They have the funding and they have the people. They just aren't doing it.
Yeah. And, it's kind of interesting watching this ICE local police department drama play out. I'm in Texas, not necessarily near the border, but a lot of local police are incredibly adversarial towards ICE, and they'll arrest ICE officers if they go into a property without a warrant. Also, there are also Texas cops that are yeah, immigrants. But I know for a fact that the NYPD will not challenge ICE, especially over this issue.
It's wild because New York City was considered a sanctuary city before. But if you actually look at, a lot of the changes that have happened over the past month and with the new administration, Eric Adams has actually, the mayor of New York City has been telling his administration and, city staff workers not to criticize Trump, not to interfere with his immigration policies in New York. And it seems like it's really a quid pro quo issue, given that, the former Democrat Biden administration had a federal investigation into Eric Adams for corruption that was mysteriously dropped by the DOJ once, not so mysterious, but once Trump took office. And so it's clear that, they're saying we're not going to look into Eric Adams. We're not going to hold him accountable. for corruption charges. We're going to allow him to sell out his city as long as they let us, come in and operate and have free reign and carry out our immigration policies the way that we want to here. So I also believe the federal government recently pulled some of the funding that they had previously given to New York City to deal with the immigration crisis. And it's not like they were just giving New York free money for our immigrants. What they were doing is paying for the border crisis that they keep complaining about that they caused to begin with, because New York is facing, the brunt of that. At least, this is their logic, not what I'm saying. But, ultimately it shows that Eric Adams has really allowed the NYPD and ICE and other law enforcement agencies to carry out unprecedented action against Palestine protesters in collaboration with the federal government and even prior to that. So I also think that's an interesting angle that people aren't looking at. And it's funny when Eric Adams was asked about Mahmoud Khalil, what does he think about this case? He actually expressed jealousy and said, it's funny, you guys care about injustice when it comes to him, but not when it comes to me. And that was actually his response to the media. And another absolutely absurd and nonsensical thing he said also was well, if he has a gun, he has to go, which nobody ever implied he had a gun, Mahmoud Khalil. And someone from the Eric Adams administration actually had to come, a spokesperson had to come back and say that, he didn't mean to suggest that he had a firearm, and basically, walk that back and be we don't know why he said that. So.
Yeah, but even if he did, I thought this was America. So, anyways, I just wanted to look at the White House messaging. This is an interaction between Sagar from Breaking Points and Caroline Leavitt, White House press secretary. And this is kind of the virulent language we're getting from the Trump administration's spokespeople.
The administration believe that it needs to charge a green card holder with a crime to be eligible for deportation.
Well, in fact, Secretary Rubio.
And just for y'all who are listening to the audio, I know most of the audience is audio. Caroline Leavitt is not wearing her giant cross anymore, apparently because it's been burning her flesh.
Reserves the right to revoke the visa of Mahmoud Khalil, and I'm glad you brought this up. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the Secretary of State has the right to revoke a green card or a visa for individuals who serve or are adversarial to the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States of America. And Mahmoud Khalil was an individual who was given the privilege of coming to this country to study at one of our nation's finest universities and colleges. And he took advantage of that opportunity, of that privilege, by siding with terrorists, Hamas terrorists who have killed innocent men, women, and children. This is an individual who organized group protests that not only disrupted college campus classes and harassed Jewish American students and made them feel unsafe on their own college campus, but also distributed pro-Hamas propaganda, flyers with the logo of Hamas. That is what the behavior and activity that this individual engaged in. And I have those flyers on my desk. They were provided to me by the Department of Homeland Security. I thought about bringing them into this briefing room to share with all of you, but I didn't think it was worth the dignity of this room to bring that pro-Hamas propaganda. But that's what this individual.
Okay, I just want to put this into the public record. As someone who has been on these campus protests, who knows Mahmoud personally, just as a matter of public record, were there any pro-Hamas with the symbols of Hamas pamphlets distributed on Columbia University campuses, to your knowledge?
Mahmoud was not distributing them, and the majority of students were not distributing them.
She also didn't provide them. So okay. Yeah, so it seems like
what does Hamas propaganda even mean, right? She could say what they are, but really they just say it to mean anything at this point. And I mean, all the other claims she made in that clip were also false. Jewish students are not unsafe on campus. Actually, the only Jewish students that are unsafe on campus are the ones protesting in support of Palestine that the NYPD is brought in to beat and arrest. So those are the only Jewish people unsafe on campus. And it's actually the US government and this whole Zionist narrative around this that's probably stoking and fomenting anti-Semitism, literally by tweeting out a photo of Mahmoud saying "Shalom, Mahmoud," making Judaism the face of fascism in the United States.
Yeah. Not only was it that, if we go back to the pull up the White House account, they posted multiple. It was Shalom, and then it was another picture of him like celebrating his detention. More to come. I feel really badly for Mahmoud. He's become like an international sensation now over this one case. It's literally insane.
The Trump administration's reaction has been absolutely disgusting, and they have been mirroring how Zionist students and faculty on our campus have been acting for over a year, and it just keeps getting amplified.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Having gone through and I can imagine how adversarial some students are to the pro-Palestine movement. I went through the School of General Studies after I got out of the Army, and I was in the School of General Studies with former IDF soldiers because, I was in Ranger Regiment, so horrible grades in high school, horrible SAT scores, but because I was in an elite unit, I got, basically just accepted to their General Studies program, and the only other people that were getting accepted from military backgrounds were Marines and ex-IDF soldiers. So there were a lot of IDF soldiers there in the School of General Studies.
Right now, we know that there are over 60 former IOF soldiers, and that the School of General Studies directly recruits from the IOF at the moment. So we have evidence of their direct recruiting, and this is not including the TAU dual degrees program. This is just general School of General Studies.
What's the TAU? I don't remember.
So they also have a dual degree program with Tel Aviv University. So it's 2 years in Tel Aviv, 2 years here. That's a slightly more mixed bag, but notably this is an incredibly problematic portion of the school because there are obviously, but there are no Arab students and no Muslim students. Last we looked into it. So it's a semi-large group of the School of General Studies that is completely lacking in diversity and showing more about the apartheid state of Israel and allowing those people to come into the US, preserving that apartheid status.
And it's not just the students, it's the administration as well. Khalil's dean, Dr. Karen Yarhi Milo, she's the head of Columbia SIPA, the School of International and Public Affairs. She herself is a former Israeli military intelligence officer and official at Israel's mission to the UN before entering academia. And she was an officer and an intelligence analyst in the IDF. So, these are the people who are in charge of people like Khalil and other Palestinian and pro-Palestinian students.
Yeah. Okay. So now that we've established all this, where I don't know, where do you see this going? Is there any sort of call to action? What would you like people to do surrounding this issue?
I think from right now, the call to action that we've had from his legal team and his wife, there are still some petitions going around that we would absolutely like people to sign on to, calling your senators. We have calling generally your congressional members, calling the mayor of New York, emailing Columbia. All of those call to actions should be very easy to find, especially on the Columbia Palestine Solidarity Coalition, Instagram and Twitter, and I'm sure also on the Within Our Lifetime social media. And then additionally, there's also a GoFundMe from his legal team. There was also
send me those links to the petition and the GoFundMe, and I'll post this in the description on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, stuff like that. So
So then the other thing is that there was a National Day of Action called, and that we should continue protesting for all students. I think Mahmoud Khalil is an example and has upsettingly become such an extreme case and upsettingly become the face of it because of how extreme this is. But this is putting all of our immigrant students at risk, and it's showing how they will continue to repress Palestinian voices first.
Yeah, they've literally said, and we know for a fact that they are looking for other students on Columbia's campus. This was reported as well, that they looked into someone else's residential school-owned apartment, and the person at the front door actually didn't let them in. So we already know that they're looking for other people and they're looking to expand this. So, Mahmoud's case shouldn't be siloed from the broader struggle for Palestinian liberation. Remember what he was protesting for. That's why he targeted him. He was protesting for the right of students' freedom of speech. Not just to not be targeted by the government, but like by their own administration. And, against what's been happening in Gaza for the last 11 days, there's been a blockade. It's Ramadan. People haven't been able to break their fast. People are starving. Electricity is cut off to Gaza, lack of medicine, medical supplies, water. That's also kind of being forgotten by this. The same Democrats who come and say that they purport freedom of speech and they support Mahmoud Khalil, and you have the Senate judicial Democrats, posting in support of him while actively creating the same environment that would inevitably lead things like this to happen. So, he's absolutely a political prisoner targeted for standing on the right side of history. And while we must demand his release and freedom, we also have to continue to expose Colombia's hypocrisy and every other U.S. university that continues to collaborate with and invest in companies, corporations, working with governments that are destroying Gaza's universities while silencing its own students. Continue to mobilize against Israel's blockade of Gaza. The genocide is not over. It's a so-called ceasefire, but over 130 Palestinians have been killed during the so-called ceasefire that the U.S. funds and enables, which makes particularly anybody who lives in the U.S., especially those of us paying taxes, basically responsible for this if we're not speaking out against it. And ultimately, it's also about defending the right to protest. It's not just going to be about Palestine. Like we've seen for the, Black liberation struggle, they called them Black identity extremists, a new term they used, to accuse them of being terrorists. So we're going to see whatever they do to us really just be expanded to everyone else. So this is about protecting the ability to resist state violence anywhere, because what is freedom of speech if it's not exactly for the type of speech that the U.S. government disagrees with? Otherwise, that's not even a conversation we need to have if it's just for speech that, agrees with what, Donald Trump is saying.
Yeah, exactly. And to that end, I'm going to do a soapbox for a couple minutes just for the audience. The Know Your Rights section. So United States First Amendment of the Constitution protects, among many things, our rights to express ourselves, gather with others, and to protest the government. The First Amendment was adopted in the 15th of December, 1791, as part of the Bill of Rights, which provides constitutional protections for certain individual liberties, including freedom of speech, assembly, and religious freedom. It doesn't specify exactly what is meant by freedom of speech. The First Amendment, defining what types of speech should and shouldn't be protected by law, has fallen largely on the courts in a series of landmark cases by the Supreme Court. And the following are examples of free speech, both direct and symbolic action, that SCOTUS has ruled are entitled to First Amendment protections. You have a right to not speak, wear whatever you want, of students to wear black armbands to school to protest a war. This was Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District in 1969. That was part of the Vietnam backlash. You can use offensive words and phrases to convey political messages. You can advertise political products, commercial products, and engage in symbolic speech. Example, burning the flag in protest. You can wait. These are not entitled. Sorry, this is kind of clunky. We're gonna send it to the editor, and he's gonna fix this. Speech that is intended and likely to incite or produce imminent lawless action. Example: speech that calls for immediate violence against a specific group of people at a specific location and a specific time. The First Amendment doesn't permit students to print articles in a school newspaper over the objections of the school administrations. School-sponsored events. Of course, these private institutions, I guess, do they have more leeway with First Amendment interpretation?
Yeah, private universities definitely do, and that's part of why I appreciated going to a public university like the City University of New York, because our First Amendment freedom of speech rights definitely go much farther over there. And that's really what protected me when also Zionists were calling for my expulsion and making like false claims about my activism and, you know, how I support Palestine. But I mean, these universities, even though they're getting billions in federal grants and funding, so it could be argued that they, you know, kind of have a responsibility to protect the, you know, Constitution on their own campus. They still are essentially like private businesses right now and can do whatever they want in that respect.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we're going to see them use that to their to the utmost. So is there? Oh, sorry, Marie Adele.
Well, I was just going to say, Columbia is also in a position, even more so than a lot of private institutions, where it is able to weaponize the state and use state resources against their students. But then they can use the fact that they are a private institution to justify a lot of that. Like they were able to shut down the subway from 1/10 through, I think, 120 some. I'm going to get it wrong. But they were able to shut down a huge amount of the one when they wanted to. So it's such a dichotomy about like what they can weaponize against us and what rights we have.
Right. And is the encampment still ongoing on campus right now?
No.
Or sorry, the protests.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, sorry, not the encampment, my bad.
Like the protest from yesterday or
Yeah.
just protests in general? So no on the protest from yesterday, but in general, there are actions being planned throughout the week and then after spring break.
Right. And so, guys, we are at the end of our time. I'm going to post the link, the GoFundMe, the petition that Marie Adele just sent. Thank you so much for coming on. Good luck this semester. And thank you so much, Nerdeen Kiswani, from within our lifetime. Really appreciate you guys taking the time and coming on here.
Thanks for having me. Good meeting you both.
All right, y'all. We will see you tomorrow for, I don't know, perhaps another Syria episode. Thank you so much for listening. Be looking out for segments of this on Mint Press News. And I don't know, good luck in 2025. Cheers, y'all.
Thank you.